Domain name.
A domain name is an identification string that defines a realm of administrative autonomy, authority or control on the Internet. Domain names are formed by the rules and procedures of the domain name system. Any name registered in the DNS is a domain name. Domain names are used in various networking contexts and application-specific naming and addressing purposes. In general, a domain name represents an Internet protocol, IP, resource, such as a personal computer used to access the Internet, a server computer hosting a website, or the website itself or any other service communicated via the Internet. Domain names are organized in subordinate levels, subdomains, of the DNS root domain, which is nameless. The first-level set of domain names are the top-level domains, TLDs, including the generic top-level domains, gTLDs, such as the prominent domains com, info, net, edu, and org, and the country code top-level domains, ccTLDs. Below these top-level domains in the DNS hierarchy are the second-level and third-level domain names that are typically open for reservation by end users who wish to connect local area networks to the Internet, create other publicly accessible Internet resources or run websites. The registration of these domain names is usually administered by domain name registrars who sell their services to the public. A fully qualified domain name, FQDN, is a domain name that is completely specified in the hierarchy of the DNS, having no omitted parts. Domain names are usually written in lowercase, although labels in the domain name system are case-insensitive.
Purpose.
Domain names serve as more easily memorable names for Internet resources such as computers, networks, and services. A domain name represents an Internet protocol, IP, resource. Individual Internet host computers use domain names as host identifiers, or host names. Host names are the leaf labels in the domain name system, usually without further subordinate domain namespace. Host names appear as a component in uniform resource locators, URLs, for Internet resources such as websites, for example, en.wikipedia.org. Domain names are also used as simple identification labels to indicate ownership or control of a resource. Such examples are the realm identifiers used in the Session Initiation Protocol, SIP, the domain keys used to verify DNS domains in email systems, and in many other uniform resource identifiers, URIs. An important function of domain names is to provide easily recognizable and memorizable names to numerically addressed Internet resources. This abstraction allows any resource to be moved to a different physical location in the address topology of the network, globally or locally in an intranet. Such a move usually requires changing the IP address of a resource and the corresponding translation of this IP address to and from its domain name. Domain names are used to establish a unique identity. Organizations can choose a domain name that corresponds to their name, helping Internet users to reach them easily. For instance, IBM's website is at ibm.com, and GNU's is at new.org. Generic domain names increase popularity. A generic domain name may sometimes define an entire category of business that a company is involved in, rather than being the name of the company. Some examples of generic names include books.com, music.com, travel.com, and art.com. Companies have created successful brands based on a generic name, and such generic domain names tend to be very valuable. Domain names are often referred to simply as domains, and domain name registrants are frequently referred to as domain owners, although domain name registration with a registrar does not confer any legal ownership of the domain name, only an exclusive right of use for a particular duration of time. The use of domain names in commerce may subject them to trademark law. In 2010, the number of active domains reached 196 million.
History.
The practice of using a simple memorable abstraction of a host's numerical address on a computer network dates back to the ARPANET era, before the advent of today's commercial Internet. In the early network, each computer on the network retrieved the host's file, host.txt, from a computer at SRI, now SRI International, which mapped computer host names to numerical addresses. The rapid growth of the network made it impossible to maintain a centrally organized hostname registry, and in 1983 the domain name system was introduced on the ARPANET and published by the Internet Engineering Task Force as RFC 882 and RFC 883.
Domain name space.
Today, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, manages the top-level development and architecture of the Internet domain namespace. It authorizes domain name registrars, through which domain names may be registered and reassigned. The domain namespace consists of a tree of domain names. Each node in the tree holds information associated with the domain name. The tree subdivides into zones beginning at the DNS root zone.
Domain name syntax.
A domain name consists of one or more parts, technically called labels, that are conventionally concatenated and delimited by dots, such as example.com. The rightmost label conveys the top-level domain. For example, the domain name www.example.com belongs to the top-level domain com. The hierarchy of domains descends from the right to the left label in the name. Each label to the left specifies a subdivision, or subdomain of the domain to the right. For example, the label example specifies a node example.com as a subdomain of the com domain, and www is a label to create www.example.com, a subdomain of example.com. This tree of labels may consist of 127 levels. Each label may contain from 1 to 63 octets. The empty label is reserved for the root node. The full domain name may not exceed a total length of 253 ASCII characters in its textual representation. In practice, some domain registries may have shorter limits. A host name is a domain name that has at least one associated IP address. For example, the domain names www.example.com and example.com are also host names, whereas the com domain is not. However, other top-level domains, particularly country code top-level domains, may indeed have an IP address, and if so, they are also host names. Host names impose restrictions on the characters allowed in the corresponding domain name. A valid host name is also a valid domain name, but a valid domain name may not necessarily be valid as a host name.
Top-level domains.
The top-level domains, TLDs, such as com, net and org are the highest level of domain names of the Internet. Top-level domains form the DNS root zone of the hierarchical domain name system. Every domain name ends with a top-level domain label. When the domain name system was devised, in the 1980s, the domain namespace was divided into two main groups of domains. The country code top-level domains, ccTLD, were primarily based on the two-character territory codes of ISO 3166 country abbreviations. In addition, a group of 7 generic top-level domains, gTLD, was implemented which represented a set of categories of names and multi-organizations. These were the domains gov, edu, com, mil, org, net, and. During the growth of the Internet, it became desirable to create additional generic top-level domains. As of October 2009, 21 generic top-level domains and 252 letter country code top-level domains existed. In addition, the ARPA domain serves technical purposes in the infrastructure of the domain name system. During the 32nd International Public ICANN meeting in Paris in 2008, ICANN started a new process of TLD naming policy to take a significant step forward on the introduction of new generic top-level domains. This program envisions the availability of many new or already proposed domains, as well as a new application and implementation process. Observers believe that the new rules could result in hundreds of new top-level domains to be registered. IANA maintains an annotated list of top-level domains in the root zone database as well as a list of special use, reserved, top-level domain names.
Second-level and lower-level domains.
Below the top-level domains in the domain name hierarchy are the second-level domain, SLD, names. These are the names directly to the left of.com, net, and the other top-level domains. As an example, in the domain example.co.co is the second-level domain, Next are third-level domains, which are written immediately to the left of a second-level domain. There can be fourth and fifth-level domains, and so on, with virtually no limitation. An example of an operational domain name with 4 levels of domain labels is ccTLDs. Each label is separated by a full stop, dot. Cis is said to be a subdomain of stateOS, and state a subdomain of OS, etc. In general, subdomains are domains subordinate to their parent domain. An example of very deep levels of subdomain ordering are the IPv6 reverse resolution DNS zones, for example 1.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0.6 ARPA, which is the reverse DNS resolution domain name for the IP address of a loopback interface, or the local host name. Second level, or lower level, depending on the established parent hierarchy, domain names are often created based on the name of a company, for example bbc.couk, product or service, for example hotmail.com. Below these levels, the next domain name component has been used to designate a particular host server. Therefore, ftp.wikipedia.org might be an FTP server, www.wikipedia.org would be a World Wide Web server, and mail.wikipedia.org could be an email server, each intended to perform only the implied function. Modern technology allows multiple physical servers with either different, cf. load balancing, or even identical addresses, cf. unicast, to serve a single host name or domain name, or multiple domain names to be served by a single computer. The latter is very popular in web hosting service centers, where service providers host the websites of many organizations on just a few servers. The hierarchical DNS labels or components of domain names are separated in a fully qualified name by the full stop, dot.
Internationalized domain names.
The character set allowed in the domain name system is based on ASCII and does not allow the representation of names and words of many languages in their native scripts or alphabets. ICANN approved the Internationalized Domain Name (IDNA) system, which maps Unicode strings used in application user interfaces into the valid DNS characters set by an encoding called Punycode. For example, KevinHeavenU is mapped to XN, WhenHeaven 54AU. Many registries have adopted IDNA.
Domain name registration. History.
The first commercial Internet domain name, in the TLD.com, was registered on March 15, 1985 in the name Symbolics.com by Symbolics Incorporated, a computer systems firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. By 1992, fewer than 15,000 .com domains had been registered. In December 2009, 192 million domain names had been registered. A large fraction of them are in the .com TLD, which as of March 15, 2010 had 84 million domain names, including 11.9 million online business and e-commerce sites, 4.3 million entertainment sites, 3.1 million finance-related sites, and 1.8 million sports sites. As of July 2012, the .com TLD has more registrations than all of the ccTLDs combined.
Administration.
The right to use a domain name is delegated by domain name registrars, which are accredited by the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, the organization charged with overseeing the name and number systems of the Internet. In addition to ICANN, each top-level domain, TLD, is maintained and serviced technically by an administrative organization operating a registry. A registry is responsible for maintaining the database of names registered within the TLD it administers. The registry receives registration information from each domain name registrar authorized to assign names in the corresponding TLD and publishes the information using a special service, the WHOIS protocol. Registries and registrars usually charge an annual fee for the service of delegating a domain name to a user and providing a default set of name servers. Often, this transaction is termed a sale or lease of the domain name, and the registrant may sometimes be called an owner, but no such legal relationship is actually associated with the transaction, only the exclusive right to use the domain name. More correctly, authorized users are known as registrants or as domain holders. ICANN publishes the complete list of TLD registries and domain name registrars. Registrant information associated with domain names is maintained in an online database accessible with the WHOIS protocol. For most of the 250 country code top-level domains, ccTLDs, the domain registries maintain the WHOIS, registrant, name servers, expiration dates, etc. information. Some domain name registries, often called Network Information Centers, NIC, also function as registrars to end users. The major generic top-level domain registries, such as for the com, net, org, info domains and others, use a registry-registrar model consisting of hundreds of domain name registrars, see lists at ICANN or VeriSign. In this method of management, the registry only manages the domain name database and the relationship with the registrars. The registrants, users of a domain name, are customers of the registrar, in some cases through additional layers of resellers.
Technical requirements and process.
In the process of registering a domain name and maintaining authority over the new namespace created, registrars use several key pieces of information connected with the domain. Administrative contact. A registrant usually designates an administrative contact to manage the domain name. The administrative contact usually has the highest level of control over a domain. Management functions delegated to the administrative contacts may include management of all business information, such as name of record, postal address, and contact information of the official registrant of the domain and the obligation to conform to the requirements of the domain registry in order to retain the right to use a domain name. Furthermore, the administrative contact installs additional contact information for technical and billing functions. Technical contact. The technical contact manages the name servers of a domain name. The functions of a technical contact include assuring conformance of the configurations of the domain name with the requirements of the domain registry, maintaining the domain's own records, and providing continuous functionality of the name servers. That leads to the accessibility of the domain name. Billing contact. The party responsible for receiving billing invoices from the domain name registrar and paying applicable fees. Name servers. Most registrars provide 2 or more name servers as part of the registration service. However, a registrant may specify its own authoritative name servers to host a domain's resource records. The registrar's policies govern the number of servers and the type of server information required. Some providers require a host name and the corresponding IP address or just the host name, which must be resolvable either in the new domain or exist elsewhere. Based on traditional requirements, RFC 1034, typically a minimum of 2 servers is required. Domain names may be formed from the set of alphanumeric ASCII characters, AZ, 0 to 9, but characters are case-insensitive. In addition, the hyphen is permitted if it is surrounded by a characters or digits, that is, it is not the start or end of a label. Labels are always separated by the full stop, period, character in the textual name representation.
Business models.
Domain names are often seen in analogy to real estate in that, 1. Domain names are foundations on which a website, like a house or commercial building, can be built, and 2. The highest quality domain names, like sought-after real estate, tend to carry significant value, usually due to their online brand building potential, use in advertising, search engine optimization, and many other criteria. A few companies have offered low-cost, below-cost or even cost-free domain registrations with a variety of models adopted to recoup the costs to the provider. These usually require that domains be hosted on their website within a framework or portal that includes advertising wrapped around the domain holder's content, revenue from which allows the provider to recoup the costs. Domain registrations were free of charge when the DNS was new. A domain holder can give away or sell infinite number of subdomains under their domain name. For example, the owner of example.org could provide subdomains such as foo.example.org and foobarexample.org to interested parties. Because of the popularity of the Internet, many desirable domain names are already assigned and users must search for other acceptable names, using web-based search features, or WHOIS and DIG operating system tools. Many registrars have implemented domain name suggestion tools which search domain name databases and suggest available alternative domain names related to keywords provided by the user.
Resale of domain names.
The business of resale of registered domain names is known as the domain aftermarket. Various factors influence the perceived value or market value of a domain name. Most of the million-dollar domain deals are carried out privately and go unreported. As of 2011, the most expensive domain name sales on record were Insure.com $16 million in 2009, Fun.com 2008 Picoseconds $9.99 million. Sex.com for $14 million in October 2010, Porn.com 2007 $9.5 million, FB.com for $8.5 million in November 2010.
Domain name confusion.
Intercapping is often used to emphasize the meaning of a domain name. However, DNS names are not case-sensitive, and some names may be misinterpreted in certain uses of capitalization. For example, Who Represents, a database of artists and agents, chose for represents.com, which can be misread as Whore Presence. Similarly, a therapist's network is named therapistfinder.com. In such situations, the proper meaning may be clarified by use of hyphens in the domain name. For instance, Experts Exchange, a programmer's discussion site, for a long time used expertsexchange.com, but ultimately changed the name to experts-exchange.com. Intellectual property entrepreneur Leo Stoller threatened to sue the owners of stealthisemail.com on the basis that, when read as stealthisemail.com, it infringed on claimed, but invalid, trademark rights to the word stealth.
Use in website hosting.
The domain name is a component of a uniform resource locator, URL, used to access websites, for example. URL, http://www.example.net/ index.html, top-level domain name, net, second-level domain name, example.net, host name, www.example.net. A domain name may point to multiple IP addresses in order to provide server redundancy for the cybernetic services to be delivered. Such multi-address capability is used to manage the traffic of large, popular websites. More commonly, however, one server computer, at a given IP address, may also host websites in different domains. Such address overloading enables virtual web hosting, commonly used by large web hosting services to conserve IP address space. IP address overloading is possible through a feature in the HTTP version 1.1 protocol, but not in the HTTP version 1.0 protocol, which requires that a request identify the domain name being referred for a connection.
Abuse and regulation.
Critics often claim abuse of administrative power over domain names. Particularly noteworthy was the VeriSign SiteFinder system, which redirected all unregistered.com and .net domains to a VeriSign webpage. For example, at a public meeting with VeriSign to air technical concerns about SiteFinder, numerous people, active in the IETF and other technical bodies, explained how they were surprised by VeriSign's changing the fundamental behavior of a major component of Internet infrastructure, not having obtained the customary consensus. SiteFinder, at first, assumed every Internet query was for a website, and it monetized queries for incorrect domain names, taking the user to VeriSign's search site. Unfortunately, other applications, such as many implementations of email, treat a lack of response to a domain name query as an indication that the domain does not exist, and that the message can be treated as undeliverable. The original VeriSign implementation broke this assumption for mail, because it would always resolve an erroneous domain name to that of SiteFinder. While VeriSign later changed SiteFinder's behavior with regard to email, there was still widespread protest about VeriSign's action being more in its financial interest than in the interest of the Internet infrastructure component for which VeriSign was the steward. Despite widespread criticism, VeriSign only reluctantly removed it after the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, threatened to revoke its contract to administer the root name servers. ICANN published the extensive set of letters exchanged, committee reports, and ICANN decisions. There is also significant disquiet regarding the United States' political influence over ICANN. This was a significant issue in the attempt to create a XXX top-level domain and spark greater interest in alternative DNS routes that would be beyond the control of any single country. Additionally, there are numerous accusations of domain name front-running, whereby registrars, when given whois queries, automatically register the domain name for themselves. Network Solutions has been accused of this.
Truth in Domain Names Act.
In the United States, the Truth in Domain Names Act of 2003, in combination with the Protect Act of 2003, forbids the use of a misleading domain name with the intention of attracting Internet users into visiting Internet pornography sites. The Truth in Domain Names Act follows the more general Anti-Cyber-Squatting Consumer Protection Act passed in 1999 aimed at preventing typo-squatting and deceptive use of names and trademarks in domain names.
Seizures.
In the early 21st century, the U.S. Department of Justice began using a tactic of seizing domain names, based on the legal theory that domain names are part of the property used by defendants to allegedly engage in criminal activities, and thus subject to forfeiture. For example, in the seizure of a gambling website, the DOJ referenced 18 U.S.C.SS 981 and 18 U.S.C.SS 1955, d. In 2013 the U.S. government seized Liberty Reserve, citing 18 U.S.C.SS 982, a. 1. U.S. Congress encouraged this by passing the Combating Online Infringement and Counterfeits Act in 2010. Consumer Electronics Association VP Petriconi was worried seizure was a blunt instrument that could harm legitimate businesses. After a joint operation in February 15, 2011, DHS and DOJ claimed to have seized 10 website domains involved in advertising and distributing child pornography but failed to mention that 84,000 websites were wrongfully accused and mistakenly taken down in the same operation.
Fictitious domain name.
A fictitious domain name is a domain name used in a work of fiction or popular culture to refer to a domain that does not actually exist, often with invalid or unofficial top-level domains such as web, a usage exactly analogous to the dummy 555 telephone number prefix used in film and other media. The canonical fictitious domain name is example.com, specifically set aside by IANA in RFC 26064 for such use, along with the example TLD. Domain names used in works of fiction have often been registered in the DNS either by their creators or by cyber-squatters attempting to profit from it. This phenomenon prompted NBC to purchase the domain name hornymanatee.com after talk show host Conan O'Brien spoke the name while ad-libbing on his show. O'Brien subsequently created a website based on the concept and used it as a running gag on the